So that was a great opportunity to start to work seriously on women's, how we meaningfully engage women in the Navy. Anyway, as part of that, I had the opportunity to go to Brussels to attend the annual NATO Committee on Gender Perspective annual conference and meeting. Now, there's a long sort of history behind this committee, which I won't go into here, but essentially it's a committee that advises the military committee in NATO on how to integrate a gender perspective into operations. And part of that, so there's two parts to it. One is sort of the external, how do we think about gender in conflict, on deployment, in operations that we conduct overseas, and then more internally, how do we make sure that our forces that we deploy have the right mix of people, the right mix of genders, the right balance of people with the right sort of diverse skills and perspectives that we need. And so it's a committee that's actually been doing quite a lot of work over many years to improve the way in which we respond to conflicts in terms of understanding the gendered implications of conflicts. And that's been the work that I've been doing over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, as well as examining how women are meaningfully engaged in the armed forces of NATO countries and partner countries, and of course Australia is a partner country. So I went along to this annual conference and committee meeting in 2012, only for the second time, so had previously been attended by an Army colleague of mine. And that's where I heard about gender advisors in NATO operations. What is a gender advisor? A gender advisor is someone who advises command on how to integrate a gender perspective into operations. What are the things that need to be considered? What are the different implications for men and women and boys and girls of conflict, because they're not the same. And it leads a lot more technical than that, but I won't, it's too much detail to go into now. But I came home from that committee thinking, there were 2 NATO operations on at the time, Bosnia and Afghanistan, and those gender advisor roles that were being held at that time were generally taken by the Scandinavian armed forces because they had been, working in this space for many years, long before countries like Australia or Canada or the UK or the US had been. And anyway, I came home back from this committee and I said to the Deputy Chief of Navy, I've just learnt about gender advisors in NATO operations and I really want to go to Afghanistan and be one. Thinking, it's never going to happen because Australia's never going to be invited to take up a gender advisor role. But it must be wishful thinking, or maybe I just saw it was going to happen, or whether it was a case of, like Arnold Schwarzenegger just said in his recent doco, he had a vision, he could see it, and he was going to make it happen, right? About a month later, the Deputy Chief of Navy came to me and said, Australia's just won the gender advisor role in Kabul, starting in January, and you're going. Because at that stage, I was the only one who kind of really knew anything about gender advisors. And I'm going, yes, finally, the tide is turning. Things are going my way, right? I'm getting something that I've asked for, something that was really meaningful to me. Because this really was part of the work, part of the journey that I was on to do a lot more for women. And it included what work we were doing internationally. So it was going to be a role that was working to NATO, not to the Australian coalition forces, but to NATO itself. This was another landmark sort of opportunity for me to go and deploy to a country that was, as we all know, coming out of conflict and still in a form of conflict with the Taliban, but being there to assist the Afghan people reconstruct their country. And my role as a gender advisor was to help the NATO forces, and especially in the operations and the plans division, understand that this conflict in Afghanistan had been different for men and women, and for boys and girls, for men and women who worked in the security forces compared to men and women who lived in, worked in their homes, those sorts of things. There's a lot of different implications of conflict on different genders. this was like putting it into practice. This was an opportunity to say, we're going to make a difference here. We're going to help the NATO commanders understand that when they go and do a covert operation or even an overt operation somewhere where they're entering a village or a community, or they're going just to do engagement with local leaders, that they need to understand the nuances of gender in those sort of communities. Now, it could be Afghanistan, it could be East Timor, it could be Rwanda. All these countries have different cultures, and gender plays a role in cultures, and they often play very different roles. And so you can't go into an operation thinking that from one country to the next that it's all the same. You have to understand the culture that you're going into. And I don't think up until sort of more recently, now that we've started to actually run some training on cross-cultural issues, that people really understood that there was a difference for men and women and for boys and girls in how they experience conflict. And so gender advisors were there to be part of a commander's advisory team, much like his political advisor and his legal advisor. And I say his because they were generally all men in those senior levels, to help them understand that when they want to go and do something, or when they want to respond to a particular issue that's occurring in this area of operations, that they do need to think about those different gendered implications. I wasn't there to manage complaints of sexual harassment or sexual assault. I wasn't there to be the advocate for women, who felt that they might have been, disadvantaged or not given an opportunity because they were a woman. Nothing to do with equal opportunity. It was there purely in an operational role to make sure that they were integrating gender perspectives into the way in which they were conducting their business. It was actually quite a serious role. People didn't take it seriously. And when I arrived in January of 2013, there hadn't been a gender advisor there for about 12 months. And so the entire sort of like command and even the worker bees, and particularly operations and plans, didn't know anything about gender. They didn't know anything about the UN Security Council resolutions that underpinned this agenda of gender perspective, all the work that was being done. They knew nothing about the history, about why this was being done. They knew nothing about why Afghanistan was implementing its own gender equality policies and why this was related and how it was related. And so it was a challenge to go into that environment and teach people, to educate people, to talk to the senior leaders, to say, this is why I'm here, this is what this means, this is what it's for, this is the difference it'll make. It'll make you more operationally effective if you know the culture that you're working in, if you know the people that you need to engage with, if you understand how different it is for them, for men and women and for boys and girls, then you'll actually respond in a much more effective way. So we had to sort of bring it down to this notion of operational effectiveness, and it still is a very important part of how we explain the use of gender advisors. For me, this was the opening the doors to working in the international space. It wasn't being done back here in Australia in the ADF, and that was to come. So while I was away in Afghanistan, and I have to say, my experiences there, I didn't actually bring anything for show and tell in terms of artefacts, because for me, what I really took away from Afghanistan was not so much the trinkets or the sort of the souvenirs or anything like that. It was more the engagements that I had with Afghan women particularly, but Afghan men in the security forces. So they were the groups of people that I was working with outside of the NATO command. Speaking with women in the security services and learning about their lives, about their challenges in their careers, what they had experienced, what they needed from NATO. So this was all about engaging with them to see how NATO could better respond to them in terms of assisting their training, supporting women, increasing the number of women in the Afghan security services. That's what I took away from that, those interactions with those people. They still stick with me today, and of course, given the circumstances in Afghanistan since 2021, it's heartbreaking for me now to think of the women that I met, some of whom had obviously ceased work during the previous Taliban regime, come back to work in the security services, the police or the army, for 20 years of the NATO coalition being there. and now being forced back into their homes again. It's really hard to understand as a woman when I sort of compare it to the experience that I've had in my military, to think that theirs is even worse than that, because they not only have experienced just technically some of the difficulties in having a career in a male-dominated sort of security sector, but also just culturally. Many men are against women working in the security sector in Afghanistan, working with men in the security sector. And they would frequently face threats of death just even for coming to work each day. And so for me, that's what I took away from that experience, was actually learning that women globally, and this is like 2013, right? So 10 years ago, women globally are still experiencing high levels of gender inequality. And this was even before the Taliban came back, right? But they were trying to improve. And under the NATO, when NATO was there, things were improving for women in the security forces. And so it just made me realise that out there in the big wide world, not just here in Australia, there are women who are experiencing gender inequality, high levels of violence, gender-based violence, sexual violence, a whole range of things that prohibit them from actually fully functioning in public life. And as we know in Afghanistan now, women are pretty much relegated to the home again. They can't venture outside. They can't go to school past primary school. They can't get an education. If they don't get an education, who are going to be the women doctors that women need to see? Women will die in childbirth. There are all these, consequences of what's happening over there. So this is still happening for women, and it happens in what we call developed countries like ours, and in, global south countries, of course, that are still developing. And I thought, I really want to be a part of this. I really want to continue to work in a way. It's still a life of service, but maybe not necessarily as a military officer, but my military background gave me the opportunities to think about how can I continue to serve in this way and support women in this way. So I came back from Afghanistan and had been put into yet another position that had been created for me. I was promoted to temporary captain, which is colonel equivalent, to lead the implementation of the UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security, which is about the gender perspective in operations, and also about, meaningfully engaging women in security sector work and improving their representation and participation. In that work, I travelled to many countries, I spoke at many events, I engaged with many military leaders, mostly men of course, really expanded my network of people who were working in NGOs, in academia, in other government organisations here in Australia or overseas, with other international armed forces and police forces. And I thought, worldwide, there's so much work that needs to be done in this space. Working to improve women's participation in the security sector, in public life in general, but my area is the security sector, but also to help other organisations, other armed forces, actually understand the need for them to consider the value that women bring to their to their armed forces or to their police forces. So again, that was another flame that was ignited. It was like this, opportunity in Afghanistan just really made me see that this is the work I wanted to do and keep doing. So I'd come back to Australia. I was leading the implementation of this work, and I did that for 3 years. And then as part of this, and funnily enough, it was Rear Admiral Trevor Jones, who had previously been the Deputy Chief of Navy that I talked about before, who by this stage was the head of military strategic commitments. And he said, we want to create a secondment to the UN to work on the women, peace and security agenda, and bring all that sort of knowledge and expertise back here to Australia to assist the way in which we're implementing it here. So ultimately he created a secondment with UN Women in New York. They have a peace and security section there that works with their country officers that are located around the world, who also then work with armed forces and police forces in those countries to address women's participation and implementing gender perspective and so on. Of course, well, because I was the one who had, I guess, the best background in this particular topic, I was the first secondee off to UN Women in 2016. And the role of this secondment was to provide military expertise to UN Women. Now, if you're not familiar with UN Women, it's the UN entity for women's empowerment and gender equality. And it works very closely with the Department of Peace Operations in terms of improving efforts to get more women engaged in peacekeeping. And so the role that this ADF secondee would have with UN Women in New York was to provide policy advice on peacekeeping and sexual exploitation and abuse, which is a very prevalent issue in many peacekeeping operations around the world, even today. In that role, I, again, travelled a lot. I was going off to Ukraine, to Jordan, to the UAE, to to Greece, to Italy, to meet with various representatives of armed forces and police to talk about what is it that UN Women could do to assist them in addressing their women's participation and representation. So again, another landmark role that just, it fed that fire within me in terms of what it is that I thought that I could do to continue to assist women, military women in particular, but women in the security organisations. So I did that role for about 15 months and unfortunately I had to return home early due to family circumstances. But when I returned home, I realised that I needed to leave full-time service. I wasn't going to be able to get a job back here in Canberra or anywhere in Australia in the ADF that would fulfil me as much as this, that would enable me to continue to work in this particular space, to continue that kind of service that I wanted to provide. And logistics was long gone by this stage. So I thought, no, I'm going to keep on this path. I've developed my international network. I really need to leverage that now and build on that now. And I decided to transfer to the reserves and opened myself up to opportunities to consult back to the UN on sort of this gender mainstreaming work with security sector organisations, and I've been doing that since 2018, and primarily with UN Women. And so I'd made those connections. I've worked with UN Women in the Ukraine, in Jordan. I've done some national work, but primarily international work, just supporting security sector work on gender. And that's where I feel that sort of the second half of my career in the military has led me to this point where I can continue to do that work with a military background, which is needed, because when I'm going to go and talk to, senior leaders in armed forces and I'm going as a UN Women representative, but I have that military background, it's much easier, for organisations like the UN Women to actually work with armed forces if they've got people who have that experience and that knowledge and that expertise. And so I've been able to combine what really was overall a very rewarding career in terms of sort of what I got out of it professionally and the technical skills I developed, and even the good and the bad experiences that I had. And combining that with my passion for wanting to support women, to help women achieve equality in their professional lives, to improve the lives of women working in organisations that were similar to mine. So to bring that all together is, for me, has been the end result of 40 years' work that I'm still continuing, today, which I love doing. When I joined the Navy, I have to tell you, I never had a grand plan. Like I said, I didn't even know what I joined, to be honest, and it was a bit of a shock. But I knew that I wanted to make a difference, and that's what kept me going. So I didn't have a 5-year plan. I know some people that can be really organised and think this is what I want to do. Like I said, Arnie says, I had this vision, I wanted to be the greatest bodybuilder in the world, and he got there, right? I never had that, but I did feel that I wanted to be part of change, that I was going to stick it out. One, because I wanted to as I said, stick it to the men and say, you know what, well, I'm here and you're not going to get rid of me, and I'm going to do the best I can do. And you might not like it, but I don't care. And also too, because I thought I deserve a career, right? I deserve to have the same opportunities that men have had for millennia in these kind of professions. And so I stuck it out, but I knew that I wanted to be part of the change that I could see was coming, because it was almost every year after, I'm going to say, the early 1990s, change was in the wind, as they say. You could almost touch it. It was like we knew that things were going to get different, and they were going to be different, and every year was going to bring change. When you think about the life of children, they're babies, and then all of a sudden you've got adults, and you think, oh my gosh, I don't know where all those years have gone. And you can think they've had different stages, right? Well, it's like that was what it was like. And because I am a parent, and I have experienced bringing, I've got 2 young adult children now, I kind of think my career has been like that, and my life in the military has been like that. There's been these stages that I've seen the change, and the change has been getting better and better. There's still some backward steps, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That happens. But when I look back on my life now, putting family aside, because I think that's my greatest achievement, the legacy I feel that I'm leaving is that I've helped improve, life in the military for women. Maybe this military, the Australian Defence Force, maybe the Jordanian Armed Forces, maybe the women in the Ukraine Armed Forces are benefiting from the work that we did, some years ago. All those things, when I look at what's happening around the world today and think, I was a little part of that. I contributed to, that little bit of change that women are now experiencing. Women are experiencing, professional careers in the Ukraine Armed Forces because of the work that UN Women did a few years ago to enable that change to occur. And I was a small cog in that wheel. But just to be a small cog in the wheel, for me, is the satisfying part. You can see I've helped make a difference there. And when I talk to women now, so I have I also mentor and I counsel, I guess, younger women in the ADF who just come to me because we know each other through some sort of capacity, and I value that relationship as well too. Like, I feel if I can make a little bit of a difference to their lives, whether they're coming to me to talk about whether they should take up a particular opportunity or a particular posting, or they've suffered some kind of experience that we'd all like to think they should, they shouldn't experience, but they do. I'm making a difference to their lives. And that's all I ever wanted to do, was just make a difference to the lives of women. I don't care about the men. Make a difference to the lives of women who are in the same situation that I'm in. And, if I can lift them up, pay it forward, someone else is going to do the same thing. They'll do the same thing for somebody else. Kind of like just keeps going. And that's what I'm hoping, essentially, the work that we do around supporting women will achieve. That we'll just continue as the sisterhood to make improvements and enable women to fulfil their full potential, which they haven't been able to do up until this point in time. The LGBTIQ plus community are very loud and proud in the ADF now. 25 years ago, you wouldn't even be able to say something about them. I'm so proud to be part of an organisation. I think Navy particularly has led the way in embracing that diversity, and they are out and proud in supporting, the LGBTIQ plus community. And when I see that, when I see people who are able to be their authentic selves, that they bring their authentic selves to work, regardless of their gender identity, sexual identity, ethnicity, gender, all those things, sex, everything else, that if they can come to work and be a valued member in the workplace, then that just, warms the cockles of my heart. And I use it's an old expression, right? But we've come such a long way, where it's been a struggle for women for such a long time. It's been a struggle for, gay people for such a long time, for all these minority groups. We have a level of understanding now, and we should, it's 2023, that actually says, let's really embrace the diversity. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who are going to look at me and they're going to say, you're so woke, and I really hate the abuse of that term woke, right? Because what they're saying is, we don't really want diversity. We don't really want, we're putting too much emphasis on diversity and inclusion and less on operational effectiveness. And I say, you know what? Actually, the diversity actually gives us better operational effectiveness. You can't go into a community in another country and not represent or look like that community that you're going into. So the days of sending, a group of white Anglo-Saxon men into a community that might be Muslim, or, it might be a Pacific island, for example, where they do embrace different gender identities. It doesn't work anymore just to send a homogenous group of people to respond to a situation where that community is different. And so for us to be operationally effective, we have to have that diversity. So it's not only diversity of individuals, it's diversity of thought, diversity of perspectives, diversity of experience. The fact that it seems to me that more people embrace that than don't is so rewarding to see. As I said, it warms the cockles of my heart. You're still going to get the people who say, we don't want it. You're being woke. You're putting that ahead of, that's going to be dangerous because you're going to think that's more important than operational effectiveness. Well, I think they're the people that don't see that we've actually changed. We don't do traditional warfare anymore. Peacekeeping missions are not the same as they used to be. There's a lot of human security skills that are required, skills that they didn't need 30 years ago, but maybe should have had, but they didn't. Now we know that they need them if they want to operate effectively in a community that they're helping, right? So it's, peacekeeping is not even the same as it used to be. We need soft skills. We don't need hard, masculine warrior skills. We need people who can engage with local communities, who have compassion, who have empathy, who can think critically, who can make decisions, who embrace diversity, who understand difference, who are prepared to lead people and show that in every way. That's what we need in peacekeeping now. So if we need it in peacekeeping, we need it here in our own armed forces, because you can't send people over there to a deployed situation if they're not operating in that capacity here. So I say to those people who criticise me and others for being woke, well, I'm proud to be woke, quite frankly, and we should all be. And we should, we also have to reflect the society that we live in. And we're no longer a white Anglo-Saxon community here in Australia anymore. Women are more than 50% of the population. I think it's something like 50% of the population come from ethnically diverse families. We're just not what we used to be. And so you've got to embrace that, whether you like it or not. And so I don't like talking to people that just won't accept that that's the reality of life, and who just want to sort of stick their head in the sand. I recall back in about 2016 when the government had lifted the gender restrictions on combat roles, there was a lot of sort of hoo-ha in the veteran community, particularly from older white male veterans, about not wanting to see women come home in body bags. Now, we don't want to see anybody come home in body bags, and sadly we have, of course, in Afghanistan. But to make a statement like that actually means that they don't understand that even with women in the roles that they were in prior to those restrictions being lifted. So all that meant then was that women could join infantry and artillery, drive tanks, do it. There was only become Navy divers. There was only actually a handful of roles that by that stage had been sort of still restricted to men only. Women was doing most roles within the military. And so, our deployed forces, whether it was to a peacekeeping mission, whether it was to Afghanistan, were people like medics. They might have been logisticians, public affairs, like a whole range of sort of different people were deployed or are deployed on peacekeeping missions. But any one of those, so they're not infantry soldiers, they're not special forces soldiers who go out and do the fighting, but any one of those people in uniform in a deployed situation could be killed. The story I want to share is that when I was in Kabul once a week I had to travel from the Kabul airport, which is where the operational command was situated, across to the Green Zone to have a meeting with the other gender advisors within the NATO coalition forces. And it involved travelling in a convoy of 2 vehicles from our base to the Green Zone. Now, the roads in Afghanistan are awful, in Kabul are terrible. There's no, people drive anywhere and everywhere. It's a hazard. The Taliban were operating, rogue Afghan forces were operating, and at any point in that trip, a NATO convoy could be blown up or targeted in some way by one of these particular forces. And we had lost NATO lives that way. And there was one day in which I was travelling to go to this meeting. We were going past a very small NATO base that was being manned by Afghan security forces, and we got held up just outside the base gates by this van that stopped. And if you can imagine, sort of 2 or 3 lanes of vehicles that kind of just go anywhere on the road because there's no lanes. You just drive where you can, turn when you can, no lights, no road rules, no nothing. And this van had pulled up in front of us and blocked us off. And then another car came up and blocked us off. And so we're pretty much these 2 NATO vehicles sitting there like sitting ducks, basically, outside this NATO base. And the immediate thought is, well, we're going to be attacked. This is a classic kind of setup. Someone's going to kill the soldiers at the gate and they're going to blow us up. And I'm a gender advisor and I just want to go home to my family. Like every person who deploys wants to go home to their family. But I'm not a soldier. I'm not fighting. I'm not going outside the base outside into the provinces where, the really dangerous areas. Yes, I had weapons on me and I would have used them if I had to. But it would be just like the medics the American medics who have died, or even their public affairs officers have died in circumstances where they've just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that could have happened to me. And the driver of my vehicle was a young Canadian corporal. And he just said to me, he said, I'm going to give them 30 seconds more, but if they don't move, I'm going to just push through. Because we were actually all really scared that this was it. This was our day to go. And anyway, fortunately, the guy from the van had come out with his piece of metal rod that he was going to go and bash the other guy with, decided to get back in his van and drive off. And it was simply a road rage incident. But it just made me realise that I could have gone home in a body bag. And I'm not a soldier fighting, right? So this whole notion that, we don't want women to join infantry or artillery because we don't want women coming home in body bags is moot. If somebody like me, who's a logistics officer and is over there as a gender advisor, could die and end up in a body bag. To me, that sort of kind of exemplified the argument around, expanding all roles to women. There is no argument to not expand all roles to women, because we're not all going to be in positions where, or we are going to be in positions where we're exposed to danger, regardless of what role we have when we're deployed overseas or on a peacekeeping mission. Just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The base I was at was attacked a few times, and we'd have incoming missiles and things like that. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but you're not out there fighting, in a war zone. So I think that argument about that sort of really got up my nose, because I thought this is. You might say that women can't do some of these roles. Sure, a lot of them take a very high level of fitness. We know that. Navy divers, for example, which are like the US Navy SEALs. Yes, you have to be physically fit, and we do have a couple of women divers now, and I'm sure that they're as fit as Mallee bulls. And I'm not going to say they're as fit as the men, because I don't like using a comparison and using men as the standard that women have to achieve. But the fact is that women can meet certain standards that are required for certain jobs. And so you can't even say, well, women shouldn't be doing these roles because they're not physically capable of it. Some are. Some men are not physically capable of doing some of these roles, but we never say anything about men that can't do it, right? Opening up the combat roles in 2016 was the last step in opening up every role in the military to women, and just saying that if you can meet the criteria and the physical requirements to do a particular role, then we will take you, regardless of gender, right? And I think that's the most important step that the military's taken in a very, very long time. Now, we might not get the critical mass that we'd like. That will take time, I think. We may not ever get large numbers of women in infantry because, who wants to be a soldier getting dirty and, digging holes and doing what they do? Some women might like to fly planes, and they should be able to fly planes. Some men like to be nurses, and they should be nurses. And I guess that's really where this whole sort of appreciation of diversity comes in, is that, women can do roles that men traditionally did, and men can do roles that women traditionally did, and it doesn't matter anymore. And the fact that we don't think it matters anymore, I think, is a really good step.